point of the bridge isn't to get you to the other side, it's for the beauty of the bridge, which Alright guys, this time we are looking at a very popular novel coming out of Japan called No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai. This book is pretty interesting, but not something I would necessarily recommend to everybody, and I'll explain why that should become apparent throughout the review. Basically, we follow the protagonist, and the protagonist explains his story throughout several journal entries, and it's a very short book. It comes in at only about 170 pages. But this isn't a story that has a strong narrative thread. You're not going to get into the story for the plot. This is mostly a story that that deals with kind of the thoughts and the meaning behind the things that happen in the protagonist's life and how they reflect on it more than what actually happens itself. If you're expecting any sort of character growth, it doesn't happen. This is basically the story about somebody who has a particularly disappointing way of looking at the world that basically gets validated over and over again from childhood into adulthood until the end, where it doesn't really get much better. It starts off when he's younger. You get a little sneak peek into that, and then how he basically copes with life, existence, other people, which he seems very, very difficult, or has a very, very difficult time, of doing. He finds certain things beautiful. He loves the aesthetic of things. And then once he realizes that some of these things have a function and a functional use, it actually severely disappoints him. The fact that things aren't made simply for their beauty is a tragedy almost to him, which at first seems a little bit poetic and romantic, but as you know, if you're carrying that into adulthood, it's a little bit insufferable. When I think about the protagonist of this and bridges and the aesthetic of bridges, the entire point of the bridge is to get you to the other side. And when it comes to the narrative of this book, you never really feel like you get to the other side of anything. You basically seem like you're standing on the same side, staring off to the other side and complaining that that side doesn't really get it, whatever it may be. And the point of the bridge isn't to get you to the other side, it's for the beauty of the bridge, which itself seems like a lesson to not follow from this book. Now, that's not to diminish the general point or gist of this book. I think there is a downside to this book, and I think there is a huge upside to this book, and I'll explain that in the two books that it reminded me of. So the first book that it reminded me of, strangely enough, and these titles are actually quite similar, not with No Longer Human, but with one another. The first comparison is with Catcher in the Rye. And the reason why I bring up Catcher in the Rye is I actually really enjoyed this book. I know a lot of people don't, but a lot of the reason why people don't enjoy this book is because they find Holden Caulfield insufferable. And I get it. I understand. He complains a lot. It's not like he has a lot to complain about. I don't find that that's the point of this book. For me, Holden Caulfield represents peeling back the layers of the world that the adults have told us about and realizing that it doesn't quite work that way, right? It's about disillusionment, maybe a little bit alienation, maybe a little bit trying to find yourself in that mess. And for me, it's almost excusable because Holden Caulfield is young. But the protagonist in No Longer Human carries this mentality all the way out into adulthood, basically, and the mentality starts to manifest itself in increasingly grotesque ways as he goes into adulthood, and that kind of manifests in his addictions that he uses to cope with the world. If you are going through these same feelings, these same emotions, the same sense of alienation, disillusionment, disenfranchisement, anything like that, it can really connect with you in a way that is meaningful and powerful. And in that way, it very much reminded me of Ham on Rye by Charles Bukowski. So I had a really difficult time in my mid-20s with my mental health for a little bit there, and speaking to people who were trying to help didn't help me out a lot. I needed to hear it from somebody who knew how to speak to me in the way I needed to be spoken to, and Charles Bukowski did that better than anybody else. Now, similar to the way that No Longer Human is semi-autobiographical, Ham on Rye is the same. Okay, Charles Bukowski basically writes through the character Henry Chinaski, who is very clearly him. And in that same line, I wouldn't necessarily recommend Hamon Wright to people unless they're already interested in picking up Bukowski. It can be difficult to latch onto. It can be difficult to follow a narrative that is so... can feel burdensome at times. Neither of those are very long books, but just due to the subject matter, very heavy, a lot of ruminating on heavy ideas. And to be honest with you, for a lot of readers, I feel like that could come off as complaining. The longer I read, the more grating it became. And maybe that's the point of it. Maybe it's the point to kind of peel back those layers and explain that, like, look, sometimes there's no redemption in a situation like this. Sometimes this is just the product of growing up with this mind in this society under this paradigm, and this is how you cope. Now, this comes up a lot. He explains in the beginning that he becomes something of a clown in order to cope with people. It's easier to do that than to try to connect with them in any way, because he fundamentally doesn't understand them on this level. And when he gets called out for clowning by one of his classmates, this kind of terrifies him, because he doesn't want to be found out. Because if he's found out for this charade that he's putting on, then again he feels exposed to the world and vulnerable in a way that he can't really tolerate. So he ends up actually befriending this person, and again ruminating a lot on how this person handles their friendship. I think his name is Takeshi. Takeshi basically talks to him and tries to compliment him in all these ways that really bother the protagonist, because the protagonist is like, look man, you don't get it, this isn't the point. And then everything he kind of says to him in good conscience and in good faith, the protagonist takes in a way that, again, if you found Holden Caulfield insufferable, you're probably going to find the same thing from this protagonist. I didn't find it that bad. I found some of his insights very powerful. I have gone through some of these feelings before. But to be honest with you, a lot of it kind of weighed down on me as the book went on. Later on, the protagonist ends up getting swept up by other friends like Horiki, who takes him out, basically partying at various places. The protagonist finds solace in prostitutes who he feels like he can be himself around in their presence more than your average person, because they're not putting on a front so much. He ends up finding some solace, but again, he finds solace in other people, and when those people fail him, he pretty much absolutely crumbles. This book, again, just like Hamon Wright was one of the most important books I ever read, because it came to me at a point in my life where I desperately needed to read it, and it was perfect for that time. If I had read Hamon Wright outside of that window, I don't think I would have loved it the way that I did. And if I reread it, I don't think it would mean the same thing that it did when I read it in my mid-20s. And I think No Longer Human is very much that book. If you are somebody who is dealing with a sense of alienation, disillusionment with society, difficulty with connecting to people in that way, this is a good book for you. This is a book where you can read it and say, oh my God, somebody understands what I'm going through. Somebody understands this predicament. And again, I feel like the fact that this is so popular in Japan, and the fact that some of these themes come up in Murakami's work, and he's very popular as well, really speaks to maybe the societal consequence of that kind of setup, or at least the perspective and sympathies of a lot of the people who live within that society. And this is another reason why I love reading fiction, and reading fiction outside of my culture and outside of my standard sphere, because you get these perspectives and you can see how they connect with somebody who's a little bit closer to my society, such as Charles Bukowski. But you can also see how it changes and its prevalence by getting that perspective from somebody who lives on the other side of the globe. It both speaks to the unique experience of a given culture, and also the universality and ubiquity of the human condition, which for me is a hallmark of great fiction. So just because this didn't hit all the notes for me, it doesn't mean it's not going to hit all the notes for you. I am going to look into more Japanese literature. I've already ordered, I think, Woman of the Sands, it's called, by Kobo Abe. I'm really interested in Yukio Mishima. So if you guys have read any other Japanese authors that you feel are worth taking a look at, whether they are like No Longer Human or not, please let me know, because I'm always looking to dig into, you know, those other perspectives from other cultures. Guys, as always, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button. It would help out the channel a ton. Smash the like button, and I will see you guys on the next video.